You're interested in something and you just want to learn more about it, but sifting through tons of articles and, just an overwhelming amount of information. Well, that's why we do these deep dives. We take a core set of information and distill it down into what really matters.
Well, today's source material you've shared is certainly intriguing. Chapter 27, Essential Wonder of God, from the Built for Greatness, Built for God, BFG movement. It's being described as the Christian edition of the Tao Te Ching. So that kind of sets the stage for something that could be quite fascinating in terms of exploring spiritual wisdom, but through a particular lens.
Yeah, for sure. So this deep dive, we're going to laser focus on this one chapter and really get into the nature of God's love and, importantly, how that can, hopefully lead to some personal growth for you.
And I think what's interesting about the way this chapter is structured is it uses a lot of these parallels between qualities of individuals and then the attributes of God. Using earthly examples like what makes a good traveler, what makes a good ruler, to illuminate something much bigger.
I like that. So let's jump right into it. First up, the chapter starts with good travelers do not leave tracks. Simple on the surface, but what's the deeper insight there?
What's fascinating about this is this idea of humility in action. Imagine a traveler that is able to move effectively, but without a need to broadcast their journey or, leave a trace that they were there. It speaks to a certain level of maturity where the focus shifts entirely away from personal validation to the intrinsic value of the action itself. Almost challenging that part of us that always wants recognition and suggesting that impact, can often happen very quietly and subtly and without fanfare. Much like, in a way, a divine presence that's not always loud and boisterous, but always effective.
So not about showing off or making a big deal out of it, just the actions themselves.
Precisely. And the renewal section of the book actually draws on Matthew 6 and Philippians 2 about doing good deeds without seeking recognition or praise from others.
Nice. Okay. Next, we have good orators do not seek errors. How does it tell us something about God?
Well, if we think about it in the context of communication, it points to a focus on truth and uplifting others. A good orator, is someone who aims to impart something valuable and not just constantly criticize or tear down. And the renewal section of the book actually ties that back to Ephesians 4, encouraging wholesome talk. And then also in Proverbs 15, that a gentle answer turns away wrath.
So instead of dwelling on everything that, we do wrong, it's more about saving us right. That God abandons no one.
Exactly. It's emphasizing this incredible saving nature of God. The focus isn't on, what we've messed up, but on redemption and ensuring that no one is left behind. It really speaks to this mindset of grace in all communication, whether it's between individuals or even humanity and the divine.
Okay, next one. This one is good reckoners do not use counters. Now, this feels a little bit more abstract. What are we getting at here?
It's a really important question about planning and decision-making and ultimately wisdom. When we think about counters, you almost think of this very superficial, almost anxious way of keeping score or making choices purely based on immediate quantifiable results. But the text supported by Proverbs 3 and James 1 actually points to a deeper wisdom, a trust in a larger process, God's guidance, if you will, than just these limited calculations.
Nice.
Imagine someone solely focused on, keeping track of all the metrics. It can blind us to the longer term or the more organic unfolding of things. God's plan, if you will. It's this kind of trust beyond just immediate visible outcomes, more of a surrender and trust than, anxious control.
God saves all things and abandons nothing.
Yes, it's the suggestion of a divine plan that encompasses everything. Not getting bogged down in the, minute-to-minute tallying of successes or failures.
Yeah.
It's this grander, more faithful approach to, just how creation unfolds.
I like that. Okay, fourth one is good rulers need no bars. So that immediately brings to mind ideas about authority and control.
And I think what's insightful here is the idea of leading through love and justice, not through force or domination.
Interesting.
The renewal section actually brings up Luke 22 and Matthew 20, highlighting that true leadership, and I think even divine leadership, is ultimately about service. Flipping the conventional idea of power on its head.
So God's authority isn't about, locking us down or imposing a bunch of strict limitations. It's not about coercion.
Exactly. God's authority here is described as saving and restoring, not dominating. It's a leadership style that's characterized by grace and, this deep desire for wholeness for all, not by erecting barriers or wielding power in a forceful kind of way.
Got it. So I guess if we step back and look at these first four, it seems like a pretty central theme is that God's actions are characterized by grace and mercy, not about forcing our hand or demanding strict adherence through, sheer power.
Precisely. It uses these very, relatable earthly examples to give us this image of a divine nature that is characterized by love, humility,
Yeah.
a focus on truth, and this deep desire for restoration rather than condemnation.
I see. All right. So the chapter then kind of shifts gears a little bit to talk about learning and growth. It has this line that good men are teachers of bad men are lessons for good men, which I find to be a really interesting and kind of challenging idea.
It is. It's this suggestion of this reciprocal relationship where, everyone, regardless of where they're at, has something to offer.
Yeah.
And, even those negative encounters, those challenging people in our lives can actually become these unexpected opportunities for growth.
Yeah.
And the renewal section of the book supports this by looking at Proverbs 27 about iron sharpening iron and Matthew 18, which emphasizes the necessity of childlike humility for spiritual growth.
And it actually gives the example of Jesus's methods as an example of this principle.
Absolutely. Jesus taught through parables, offering profound wisdom in these very accessible stories, but he also very directly confronted shortcomings when necessary. So it's this idea that learning can come through gentle guidance and sometimes through more direct challenges as well.
Right. And it specifically points out that, we shouldn't just write off or despise those who are struggling or, making mistakes or quote unquote bad men.
Yeah, the source is very clear about that bad men are not to be despised, but seen as opportunities for growth as they teach humility, patience, and the necessity of God's grace. It's about shifting our perspective and recognizing the potential for learning in every interaction, even the difficult ones.
Interesting. So we're kind of drawing towards the end of this chapter, and it really culminates in what it calls the essential wonder of God's love. What's the big takeaway about this love that we should be walking away with?
It really comes down to the transformative power of God's love. It's not just a passive feeling or an abstract concept. It actively works to change things, to redeem situations, and to renew individuals. It talks about God's love being this redemptive force, offering salvation not based on our own efforts, but as a gift, and then enabling us to live lives of good works as a result.
So it's not just being forgiven or, let off the hook for past mistakes, but being fundamentally changed and, empowered moving forward.
Exactly. And the chapter kind of summarizes this perfectly by saying that God's love saves and transforms both the righteous and the unrighteous. It's this love that really transcends all boundaries and has this inherent power to bring about genuine and lasting change.
I like that. So the source material you shared also introduced this framework for personal renewal called the Trinitarian Method, or MAP, mindset, aim, and practice. How do these three things connect with, everything that we just talked about in chapter 27?
I see it as this very practical roadmap, for how we can actually integrate these principles into our daily lives. The renewal section really breaks it down in terms of cultivating a specific mindset, setting a clear aim, and then developing practices that align with this whole understanding of God's love.
So let's break each one down a bit. For mindset, it highlights humility in action, which directly links back to good travelers do not leave tracks. What does that look like, putting that into practice?
Well, the key is to, consciously and consistently focus on service and contribution without needing external validation or applause. As the renewal section reminds us in Matthew 6 and Philippians 2, our primary motivation should be the act itself and aligning with a greater purpose, not just seeking personal glory or recognition. It's letting our actions speak for themselves.
Gotcha. Okay, so moving on to aim, the principle is aim for truth in communication, which obviously goes back to that line, good orators do not seek errors. So what should our intention be when we are, communicating with others?
Our fundamental aim should be to communicate with honesty and integrity and a genuine desire to build others up. And the renewal section actually reiterates that by bringing up Ephesians 4 and Proverbs 12, which really emphasizes, the power of wholesome and truthful words that encourage and support rather than criticism, negativity, or manipulation.
Interesting. Okay, last one for practice, we have practice wisdom in decision-making, which ties to good reckoners do not use counters. How do we actually, implement that, day to day when we are making choices?
It means choosing to rely on a deeper sense of wisdom, whether that's prayer or seeking guidance beyond just the immediate data or, our own very limited perspectives. As Proverbs 3 and James 1, encourage us. It's about seeking that spiritual understanding in all of our decisions and trusting in a wisdom that transcends just, worldly calculations.
So MAP really gives us this tangible way to, embody those messages of humility, truthfulness, and wisdom, in our thoughts, our intentions, and our actions.
Exactly. It's a practical pathway for living out this, essential wonder of God's love and experiencing that personal renewal as a result.
So the final section in this source material is called Respond, and it takes a look at some shared truths that show up across different religious tradition, which I think is fascinating. So let's explore some of those parallels. So that first line, good travelers do not leave tracks, which we connected with humility and selflessness. That seems to have some echoes in other faiths as well.
It's really remarkable how much this concept resonates across traditions.
Yeah.
So in Buddhism, there's a huge emphasis on non-attachment, which very much aligns with, not needing to leave a track of ego, if you will. In Islam, there's a beautiful hadith that states that the best among you are those who are the most beneficial to others, emphasizing that selfless benefit. Even in Hinduism, the concept of karma yoga emphasizes action performed without attachment to the results. It all points to this idea that true significance is often found in giving and serving without the need for personal recognition.
Yeah, that's really cool. What about good orators do not seek errors and this principle of integrity and truthfulness in how we communicate?
Again, we see these amazing parallels. So in Christianity, obviously, there's the value of truth-telling. Buddhism includes right speech as a core element of the Eightfold Path. In Islam, the Quran, Surah al-Baqarah, very explicitly warns against mixing truth with falsehood. Judaism, of course, has the commandment against bearing false witness. So this fundamental value of truthfulness, it seems to be, a cornerstone of ethical teachings in so many different faiths.
I love that. Okay, what about the one, good reckoners do not use counters? The idea of a deeper wisdom beyond just superficial, measures.
Well, in Christianity, we are encouraged to seek divine wisdom through prayer and faith. Buddhism places huge emphasis on wisdom as absolutely essential for enlightenment. Islam, God teaches what we do not know, pointing to a source of wisdom beyond just our immediate grasp. Hinduism also emphasizes this pursuit of higher knowledge and understanding. So again, it speaks to looking beyond the surface and seeking that deeper understanding.
Yeah, I love that. What about the leadership principle we discussed? Good rulers need no bars.
Well, in Christianity, as we touched upon earlier, the greatest leader is often seen as the servant of all. Buddhist ideals, often emphasize compassion to detachment from personal power. There's a teaching in Islam as well that, really highlights that, the leader is someone who serves and cares for the community. And even in Jewish tradition, there's this huge emphasis on righteous leadership being about the well-being of the people. So again, this idea of leadership rooted in service rather than domination.
Yeah, cool. The chapter also made the statement, God saves others and abandons no one, which we tied back to unconditional love and mercy. Do we see echoes of that in other faiths?
Absolutely. While the theological expressions might differ, the core idea of this boundless compassion and mercy is very prevalent. So in Buddhism, you have the concept of karuna, which is this all-encompassing compassion. In Islam, God is often described with attributes like Ar-Rahman and Ar-Rahim, the most merciful, the most compassionate. And this is, reflected in the opening of every chapter of the Quran almost. And, even in Hinduism, you have deities that embody love and compassion. So again, pointing to this understanding of a divine force characterized by this unwavering love and mercy.
So cool. So finally, good men are teachers of bad men. Bad men are lessons for good men. And this, principle of learning and growth through all experiences.
Well, Christianity, has the concept of trials and tribulations refining our faith. Buddhism emphasizes learning and transformation through suffering. Islam speaks of, wisdom found in adversity. So, again, these parallels suggest this kind of universal understanding that growth and learning are intertwined with all types of experiences.
It's so powerful to see these recurring themes. Just points to the shared human wisdom. Perhaps, as the source even quotes St. Thomas Aquinas, truth cannot contradict truth.
Well said. And recognizing, these shared values, I think, could be a really powerful step towards greater understanding and empathy and even, unity in an increasingly diverse world.
For sure. So to kind of bring our deep dive to a close, exploring chapter 27 of Built for Greatness, Built for God, has revealed this essential wonder of God's love through all of these insightful analogies and really highlighted the importance of humility, truthfulness, wisdom, and this overarching sense of mercy and grace.
And as we've seen, these principles further explored through, BFG Handbook and this MAP framework, offer a very practical and actionable way for each of us to, really pursue personal renewal. And by intentionally, aligning our mindset and our aims and our daily practices with, what this chapter describes as really the very nature of the divine.
Here's a final thought for you to chew on. Considering these really remarkable parallels and teachings, across so many different traditions, from the importance of selfless service to that fundamental value of truth and compassion, how might a deeper awareness of these shared values actually empower us to build more meaningful connections and foster a greater understanding with people from all walks of life? And on a more personal level, as you've been listening to this exploration, which of these principles resonates most strongly with you right now? And what's one small, concrete step you could take today to integrate that principle more fully into your own life?
Really profound questions to reflect on.
Absolutely. So with that, we'll bring this deep dive to a close. Hopefully this exploration has provided you with some valuable insights.
I think so.
Keep those questions, turning over in your mind. Keep seeking knowledge and, keep taking those deep dives. Until next time.